The first time Maeve Callahan saw the silver SUV kicking up dust on the gravel road to the Double Bar C, she folded her arms across her chest and planted her boots on the porch as if the boards under her heels were bedrock. She'd spent every daylight hour of the past 3 weeks nursing sick horses, her horses, while the ranch hands whispered about a fever that moved through the herd like smoke. When her foreman suggested bringing in some fancy veterinarian from Denver, Maeve had agreed, but only because she was out of ideas and out of time. She thought they'd send a middle-aged specialist with textbooks under one arm. Instead, the vehicle door swung open, and a man barely past 30 unfolded himself onto the red dirt, dark hair mussed by the drive and city-trimmed beard already catching dust. He spotted her right away, offered a quick smile, and said, "Dr. Daniel Rios, you must be Ms. Callahan." "Maeve," she replied, keeping her expression flat. "You're late." "Road construction on 285, he explained without apology. "Point me toward the barn?" Maeve didn't move. "We've tried penicillin, Banamine, electrolytes, charcoal. Nothing's working. If you've come all this way to suggest the same, save yourself the time and bill me." Daniel slung a canvas field bag over one shoulder. "I'm here to look, listen, and then talk, in that order." The ranch hands traded silent nods. Maeve saw it, the relief at an outsider's confidence, and something tightened in her chest. She gestured with her chin. "Follow me." The main stable was a cathedral of wood and hay-scented gloom. 32 horses stood in separate stalls, heads low, eyes dull. A few flared nostrils, with each breath as if every inhale were a task assigned by a cruel boss. Maeve moved down the aisle, touching necks, murmuring names. Jasper, Lily, Old Crow. Daniel listened, noted temperatures, peered at gums, drew blood. His questions cut through the hush. "Any new feed deliveries?" "Same supplier for 8 years. Change in pasture rotation?" "Rotated in April." "Nearby construction, chemical spraying, mining runoff?" Maeve bristled at each question, hearing an unspoken accusation that she'd missed something obvious. Finally, she snapped, "Doc, we raise working quarter horses. I know every blade of grass they eat." Daniel's pen paused over his notepad. When he looked up, there was no condescension in his eyes, only fatigue and concern. "I've seen outbreaks sweep herds in Oklahoma, Texas, and once in Morocco. They all started from something nobody thought worth mentioning." Maeve opened her mouth to retort, but stopped, surprised by the gentleness in his voice. He turned toward the next stall, and she found herself following. By dusk, they'd examined half the barn. Daniel suggested moving the worst cases to the smaller quarantine shed. Maeve didn't like admitting the word quarantine belonged on her ranch, but she barked orders anyway. When night settled over the valley, the hands drifted toward bunkhouses, leaving the two of them alone under a blood-red moon. Daniel wiped sweat from his brow. "You get supper around here. The cook rings the bell at 7. Maeve tilted her head toward the ranch house. "Hope you like beans." "Beans sound perfect." He hesitated. "Mind if I wake at sunrise? I want to see how their vitals shift overnight." Maeve almost laughed. "I'm up before the sun every day. Coffee pot'll be on, strong." He smiled. "Looking forward to it." She watched him stride towards the guest cabin and disliked the small flutter under her ribs. "This is business, Maeve," she warned herself. "Save the horses. Send him packing." Night brought wind and restless dreams. When her alarm clanged at 4:45, Maeve dressed in the dark and padded to the kitchen. She spooned coarse grounds into the percolator, set it on the stove, and leaned against chipped tile, listening to the first pops of boiling water. Sunrise painted the window's edge pink, then tangerine. She carried 2 dented tin mugs onto the porch just as Daniel emerged from the cottonwoods, hair damp from a quick wash at the pump. He climbed the steps and accepted a mug, fingertips briefly brushing hers. Electricity zipped along her forearm, shocking in its honesty. "Smells like courage," he said, inhaling. It's rougher than courage. Careful. They sipped in silence, watching sunlight flood the valley. Horses whickered faintly, a sound half hope, half hunger. Maeve cleared her throat. Daniel, about yesterday, I appreciate your thoroughness. Comes with the job. He leaned on the porch rail, gaze fixed on the pastel horizon. I sent samples to the state lab overnight. Might take a day or two. Until then, we treat symptoms, keep them hydrated. I'd also like to check your water lines. Our well's clean. I believe you, he said softly. But believe me too. Contaminants can sneak in. A cracked pipe, seepage from an old pesticide drum. Simple things become lethal. Maeve nodded, surprised how easily she could talk with him now that the sun was up and coffee warmed her palms. They spent the morning tracing water routes, stainless tanks, black rubber troughs, windmill pumps. Daniel crouched to collect samples, explaining each step without talking down. Maeve found herself volunteering information, the year they replaced the south fence, how spring floods carved new channels through clay, where wild chamiso shrubs grew thickest. By noon, they'd walked 5 miles. Clouds gathered like dark sheep in a canyon, and thunder rolled in time with her impatience. The illness showed no mercy. 2 more horses spiked fevers. Inside the quarantine shed, Daniel hung antibiotic IV bags, while Maeve steadied a trembling mare named Willow. Daniel's sleeves were rolled, revealing forearms corded with sinew from years of field work, not gym memberships. Sweat darkened Maeve's collar, and her braid stuck to her neck. Yet amid the worry pulsed a strange, shared rhythm. As if in bending together over the same animal, they formed a single, competent organism. When Willow finally settled, Daniel exhaled. Good girl, he murmured, and Maeve wasn't entirely sure he meant the horse. Rain snapped on the tin roof. They sat on upturned feed buckets, letting water drum away words. Maeve toyed with her hat brim. I've never felt this helpless, she admitted, voice low. Daniel's eyes held no judgment. The worst part of caring is the risk of failing. But you showed grit calling me in. Grit or desperation. Sometimes they're identical twins. Maeve almost smiled. Lightning flashed, and for a heartbeat, she imagined leaning against his shoulder, letting him carry the weight she'd shouldered alone since her father died. She caught herself and stood. I should check the yearlings. He rose too, close enough she smelled rain on cotton. I'll come. They fought side by side for 48 hours. Maeve forgot to resent instructions from the city vet. Daniel forgot he was 500 miles from polished clinics and midtown Thai takeout. They existed in a world of pulse rates, syringe caps, whispered reassurances. At dawn on the 3rd day, the state lab called with preliminary results. Daniel took the satellite phone outside, listened, then strode back into the kitchen where Maeve hunched over a map of irrigation lines. It's not viral, he announced. They detected pyrrolizidine alkaloids in the blood and liver enzymes through the roof. Maeve blinked. You're saying it's poisoning? She felt her knees weaken. From what? Common groundsel. Ragwort. Daniel pointed out the window, where yellow wildflowers dotted a distant pasture. Under drought stress, horses will nibble what they usually avoid. The toxins cause progressive liver damage. Early signs mimic infection. All this time, she'd kept them in the pastures to rest, not realizing she'd fed them poison. Shame pooled in her stomach. She forced herself upright. How do we fix it? Remove them from exposure. Supportive care. Milk thistle extract. High-energy feed. Vitamin B. Damage is cumulative, but catch it early and many recover. His gaze gentled. Maeve, you couldn't have known. Ragwort's harmless to cattle. So few ranch manuals mention it. She strode toward the door. Explanation or not, I'm the one in charge here. I'll gather the hands. Outside, wind whipped her braid as she rang the iron triangle bell. Men and women spilled from bunkhouses. Maeve climbed a hay bale and laid out the plan. Move the herd to the North Mesa's ryegrass. Pull every flowering weed by its roots. Burn it in steel barrels. Her voice carried steel, but inside she felt cracked porcelain. When the crew dispersed, Daniel stayed behind. "You okay?" he asked. "For now." He studied her, then offered something simpler than sympathy: practical partnership. "I'll coordinate the IV rotations tonight. You need sleep." She almost refused, but exhaustion crowbarred open her pride. "I can manage 4 hours." "I'll wake you for the 2 a.m. walkthrough." He touched her elbow, fingertips light as moth wings. She didn't move away. Maeve's dreams were a tumble of yellow flowers turning to fire. When Daniel shook her awake, the clock read 1:58. She pulled on boots and followed him into moonlit stillness. Crickets sawed at the silence. In the barn, Jasper nickered with something like interest. Maeve pressed her forehead against his muscled neck and felt tears prick. "Stubborn brute," she whispered lovingly. Daniel waited until she straightened. His temperatures dropped a degree. He grinned, and in that grin, she glimpsed the kid he'd once been, the one who probably rescued stray dogs and smuggled them under apartment stairwells. They finished checks by 3:30. Outside, the sky was a black canvas pricked by a million cold fires. Daniel tilted his head back. "City lights drown this out. People forget the universe is showing off every night." Maeve wrapped arms around herself against the chill. "I used to stargaze with my dad right out there on the ridge. He knew constellations better than any rancher had a right to." "Will you show me?" Daniel asked. She hesitated, but he'd already found a fleece blanket in the tack room. They climbed the ridge, sat shoulder to shoulder on sandstone. Maeve pointed at, "That's Scorpius. The bright red one is Antares." Daniel followed her finger like a diligent student. She felt the warmth of him beside her, steady as a campfire. Without thinking, she leaned her head against his shoulder. He didn't flinch or rush, just slipped an arm around her back and continued tracing stars until words felt unnecessary. When false dawn painted the horizon silver, Maeve rose, brushed dust from her jeans, and offered her hand. Daniel took it and didn't let go until the ridge path narrowed. Back at the ranch house, they parted with nothing more than a nod, yet the air tasted different, charged. The next week unfolded like a long-held breath finally released. Horses regained appetites. Jasper even tossed his head at feed time, nearly bowling over a ranch hand. They rotated pastures, hauled away wilted ragwort, and followed Daniel's treatment protocol to the letter. Each dawn, Maeve brewed 2 mugs of brutal coffee, and each dawn, Daniel joined her on the porch, boots touching, silence comfortable. They talked about everything except leaving or staying. She learned he'd grown up in Chicago's south suburbs, raised by grandparents who kept chickens in a postage stamp backyard. He learned she'd never lived farther than 20 miles from the cottonwoods shading her porch. Time felt supple, stretching to hold shared stories and the gentle collisions of daily work. One evening, after the last antibiotic schedule was crossed off and the quarantine should swept spotless, the crew lit a mesquite fire to celebrate. Someone unearthed a bottle of bourbon. Fiddles played from a Bluetooth speaker balanced on a hay bale. Maeve stood at the edge, watching flames flutter like golden cloth. Daniel approached with 2 tin cups. "To the Double Bar C," he toasted. She clinked his cup. "And to city vets who tolerate stubborn ranchers." Their eyes met over the burnished rim, and the moment pulsed with possibility. Music swelled. Without a word, Daniel set their cups on a crate, held out his hand. Maeve let him guide her into the dust-packed corral. Under strings of old Christmas lights, they swayed. No fancy steps, just bodies remembering that closeness could be simple. When the song slowed, Daniel's breath traced her ear. "I have to head back Tuesday," he murmured. She stiffened, then forced calm. "Of course. Your practice needs you." "I can hand it off for another week," he admitted. "But after that," Maeve stepped back. Cool night air seeped between them. She wasn't 17 anymore, hoping love meant someone staying. She was 36, with debt on the north pasture fence and a family plot on the hill. The double-bar C was hers to carry. "Then after that, you go," she said quietly. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he nodded. They returned to the fire, separate shadows. The next 2 days were measured in last things. Daniel's last rounds, last adjustments to dosage logs, last coffee on the porch. On Tuesday before dawn, Maeve found him there already, holding a mug she hadn't poured. Stars still clung to the sky. "I couldn't sleep," he confessed. "Me either." He stared into the dark. "I've been offered a post at CSU's veterinary hospital. Teaching, research. I told them I needed to think." Maeve's pulse stumbled. "Congratulations." "It's 3 hours from here. Still a long commute for sunrise coffee." She tried to keep it light, failed. Daniel set his mug down with a decisive clink. "Maeve, I don't want to drive away wondering. Tell me to stay, and I'll postpone Denver. We can figure the rest out." Every caution her father taught whispered through her. Love doesn't fix leaky roofs, won't pay feed bills, but the sunrise she'd watched with Daniel tasted like remembering she was alive, not just responsible. She inhaled the scent of strong coffee, dew on pasture, wood smoke ghosts. It was home. And home, she realized, had expanded to include the man standing before her. "I won't ask you to give up anything," she said slowly, "but I am asking you something else." She stepped closer until they breathed the same damp air. "Come back, often. Make this," she gestured at the porch, the sky, "part of your life. We'll build from there." Daniel's eyes shone with relief. "That's all I hoped to hear." He cupped her cheek, and the kiss they shared was gentle, promising, tasting of coffee gone lukewarm and futures warming up. He left after breakfast, the SUV's dust plume trailing like a comet's tail. Maeve watched until it melted into the horizon, then faced the ranch. Jasper whinnied, full-bodied and impatient. Work waited, but it felt lighter, threaded with anticipation. Autumn arrived in slow gold. Ragwort never stood a chance under the crew's vigilance. Horses thundered across safe pastures, manes flying like banners. Maeve wrote Daniel nightly emails, some technical, some irreverent, all ending with the same line: "Coffee at dawn misses you." His replies came at odd hours: clinic lunch breaks, airport layovers, hotel lobbies where he lectured visiting vets about toxic weeds. Each message ended, "Hold me a mug." By Thanksgiving, Daniel announced he'd accepted the Colorado post, but negotiated field days. 2 midweek shifts he could spend off-site for applied research. The first of those days, he arrived before dawn. Maeve met him halfway up the path, sunrise painting their breath silver. She pressed a steaming cup into his gloved hands. He grinned. "Still strong enough to melt a spoon?" "Stronger." She kissed him and tasted tomorrow. In the year that followed, Daniel's SUV became as familiar as barn swallows. He'd pull in Wednesday nights, teach Maeve how to ultrasound fetlocks or read new bloodwork panels, then wake with her Thursday for coffee under skies, too big to own, yet small enough to share. Some weekends, she'd drive to Fort Collins, where city lights glimmered but never quite erased the stars he pointed out from her motel balcony. The illness faded into memory, marked only by a bundle of dried ragwort hanging above the ranch house doorway. A reminder of fragility and fortune. One cowboy claimed it was good luck medicine. Maeve knew it was more than that. It was evidence that sometimes mercy arrived in a dust-coated SUV with a city vet inside, asking impertinent questions and refusing to back down. On a June morning, after coffee tasted of summer thunder, Daniel reached into his pocket. His hand shook a little. "I know you're not much for jewelry," he began. "So, I didn't bring a ring." Maeve arched an eyebrow, amused and unprepared. "Did you bring an ultrasound wand? Because that'd be on brand." He laughed, the sound she loved best. "No wand. But I brought this." He produced a simple brass key on a leather string. "It's to my apartment. I figure we've already got keys to each other's worlds. Maybe time to make it official." Maeve closed her fingers around the key. "I don't have an apartment to match, city boy." "You've got a whole horizon," he said, voice rough. "Let's trade. My key for your sunrise." She slipped the leather string over her head, the key resting against her sternum like a steady heartbeat. "Deal." They sealed it with a kiss the color of dawn. If anyone asked later how a stubborn ranch owner fell for a big city veterinarian, Maeve would shrug and say it happened between doses of milk thistle and mugs of coffee. But the truth lived in quieter places, in the hush of stalled breaths over a sick mare, in the flame-lit waltz where leaving became a question instead of a certainty, in the first light that gilded two cups, two hands, and the sure knowledge that love, like open skies, was wide enough to ride forever.